So here we are in 2020 at the very end, and the whole year has been quite an unusual one, to say the least, right? With the pandemic and the lockdowns and the election, I guess, contested results, that we've also got businesses that have failed. 110,000 restaurants in the United States have closed down since the beginning of the COVID lockdowns. And so I'm not just talking temporarily, it's permanent shutdowns. Theaters, other businesses, and now we are facing some crises in the United States. But you and I might be facing personal challenges, frustrations, difficulties that we've never faced before. And I want to encourage you, because God has answers for that. And David in the Psalms dealt with many things, good and bad. Some things he brought on himself, sins with Bathsheba. And in the midst of all this, though, he had God's forgiveness. He had natural challenges, right? And obstacles even as a king, and just national challenges. But oftentimes he was battling for his life and battling for the country. And in the midst of this, he could feel heartbroken, or he could get down. All of us will go through that. And so you might be going through something spiritually or emotionally or physically for the first time. You're like, I'm dealing with something I've never had to deal with before. I'm frightened. I've got a prognosis that I don't understand, or that I do understand, and it's giving me some pause. And I'm fearful because of what may come of that. You may be dealing with everything, from all those emotions, from all those different things coming up. And because of this, we oftentimes can feel defeated. David was in that situation. In Psalm 4, verses 1 and 2, he says this. Actually, I'm just going to read verse 1. That'll lay the groundwork. Psalm 4, verse 1, it says, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer." Now, this is David dealing with the circumstances around himself. Some say this is when Absalom was chasing him. This could be just when Saul was chasing him, other things. We really don't know the context exactly, but we know what's going on. He's asking God, the righteous judge, to step up and to help him in this area. So he was dealing with physical difficulties and ailments, right? On the run, out in the wilderness, and just to supply his needs. So in a sense, financially, right? And you can see his heart emotionally. He's making a plea to God because emotionally he's drained, he's hurting, he's distressed, he's a little bit fearful, right? Physically, then he's under stress and literally physically under attack, right? Could be killed by the enemy. And all this hinges on the spirituality of a person. So you could be in this situation, right, dealing with all these different things, but this one thing that he's convinced is prayer is going to help him out. And I know we've kind of covered this before. I know that. But David knows this too. And he's in the place where he's saying, I don't know what to do, right? And he's convinced that I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. I need to get back into convicted prayer. Not a lay me down to sleep prayer. Not a Lord bless this food prayer. I mean, get down. Get down into prayer. Find your prayer closet. Meditate, read on the Word, and pray it back to the Lord. Time to get serious with prayer. And this is he's coming back and says, I'm convinced, this psalmist, David, is convinced prayer is necessary. Prayer is the answer that I seek. Jesus in Luke 18 talked about not becoming faint-hearted when you pray. And he gave the idea of, here's a godless judge. He doesn't fear God. He doesn't fear man. And a widow comes along and she has a grievance. But widows were on the lower edge of the totem pole as far as the caste system and what, influence they could peddle. And I mean, if you were a rich person, the judges would listen to you, immediately, and you could make your donation, so to speak. But the people that couldn't really advantage a judge, we'll hear you. Get at the end of the line, right? Where's the end of the line? Just keep walking, we'll tell you. And so here's this widow woman, but she doesn't give up. She just continues to come by, continues to ask for justice, continues to call upon this unjust judge until finally he's like, I'm so tired of you coming around. I don't fear God, I don't fear man, but geez, man, you just are relentless. So guess what? All right, I'll listen to you. I'll give you what you want. The contrast with this is that God isn't like that judge. God is caring. God is loving. God sets the standards, right? So that he will respond in our time of need. So he's saying, but you don't always get everything you need and everything you want right up front. He's telling us, persevere, stay in there. Sometimes it takes a while for prayer to be answered because I'm setting multiple things up. The Jews, in Esther, when they were praying and they were being persecuted, and now this edict comes down that they're all going to be slaughtered and all their goods are going to be taken, and Haman is strutting around like, hey man, I've won this whole thing. But God put a woman raised up for just a time of this, Esther, in the courts. And Esther stood up and said, if I die, I die. But we can't let this stand. And she worked the situation around and petitioned because God was praying, or people were praying to God for her, right? And she was praying to God, and God worked the circumstances, not exactly as you would think. The law is not going to be overturned, but look, we're going to give you this avenue. Arm yourselves so that you can fight when it comes. But guess what? Got to have the backbone to fight. You got to stand up and say, no, I'm not taking this devil. I'm not taking this anymore. It's not name it, claim it. I mean, if you have an illness, it may overcome you and you may die, because we eventually all die of something. But it doesn't mean we roll over. We are salt and light, that we stand up to do what's right. And so in the midst of this, David is dealing with these fears, but he turns to the Lord and he talks about the situation in verses 2 and 3. He says, "How long, O you sons of men, you jars of clay, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him." David he's coming back and he's going, it seems like the godly has dominated the scene. It seems like the godly is in control. But he turns to him and he goes, "You sons of men, you pieces of clay, you gather together pieces of dust," right? Because our frames are but dust. Who are you to stand up against God Almighty? You're trying to lie about me. You're full of unworthiness. In other words, you don't have a single shred of character. But I will call upon the Lord. I will seek the Lord, and the Lord will step up. The wicked, what he's saying is, you wicked, you have plans, all right? You're planning all this stuff. So you may be sitting there thinking, oh man, the world is against me, the world is against us. I'm having struggles at work. I'm doing different things. I'm trying different things. I feel spiritual attacks. Okay, honestly, yeah. And it's okay to feel like, man, I'm surrounded, and where is the Lord? Where are the righteous? But he says, doesn't matter. God looks at me. God focuses on me, and he's the one who looks at me as righteous. He's the one who hear my plea. Because if somebody comes to court, because this is a court case, right? He's bringing this before God. Hear my plea. If a righteous person walks into court, in other words, they have a right standing argument, then they're going to get heard. But what he's saying is, I'm right standing because of God. I'm not perfect, but it's the judge who sees me as righteous. So I can come to the court being imperfect. So you can feel like, who am I to ask God for relief or help or remedy when all these things are going on and I'm a sinner too, right? Who am I? And David is coming in saying, I'm not. They're definitely not. But at least because of the blood of Christ, right? Because of God's holiness, I have a right standing before him, even though I'm not totally righteous, right? But in this sense, he's going to hear what I'm saying. And verse 4 and 5 says this, be angry and do not sin. Reminds you of a verse in the New Testament, huh? Meditate within your heart and on your bed, and be still, Selah. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. So how do you respond to such a blatant attack? He's seeing this come through. He's coaching himself. He's saying, hey, I'm going to hold my mouth. I have a righteous argument, but I'm going to be restrained. It's not that you take it on the cheek. He's not saying you give up. He's saying don't let this anger creep over the line into sinfulness. It's okay to be angry, having a righteous anger. But he goes, I'll be able to think about it. Meditate on your bed. In other words, think about what you're going to say before you say it. Think about what you're going to do before you do it. Don't just run over and cross that line out of emotionalism, self-righteousness. Allow it to percolate in yourself a little bit, right? Not to the point where it builds and explodes and you've burned the coffee. Burnt coffee tastes horrible, by the way, right? Till it is a perfect cup, a perfect brew that you can say, all right, I think I can deliver this. I think this is what I need to say or do, or maybe not do. But he is going to defend himself, and David is waiting on the Lord. And in doing so, he's doing the right thing. Now, he has a number of things. How do you do this? He says, I'm going to be still before God. I'm going to contemplate what is good and right. I'm going to be willing to sacrifice if necessary to bring righteousness, right? And to put my confidence in the Lord of all the earth. So these things, this is partly what he's meditating on. And so when he says, I'm going to be still, allow God to speak, but I'm also going to be willing to sacrifice a little bit. Like Jesus says, hey, if somebody smacks you on the right cheek, turn the left also. And he's not saying allow yourself to be beat up. He says if somebody's bringing an accusation against you, he wants you to take you to court or do these things, you don't have to be ripped off, but do what you can to appease the situation and then in righteousness, right? And maybe you take a little bit of a loss even though you may be right, just to clear the air and to smooth things over. Now, it doesn't mean that you give in to lawlessness or unrighteousness or allow evil to run rampant. That's not what it's saying. But what we need to look at is, can I simmer down? Can I wait on God? Is there anything where there's a godly compromise? And if there is, can I do that without compromising my integrity or anything biblical or do anything unethical? Can I, bring a good compromise? If I can, I can. And then, at the end, no matter what's going on, can I just trust in the Lord? Can I just choose to trust in him in all things? So he's the God of all the earth. So David does. Then he goes on, verses 6 through 8, he says this. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You've put gladness in my heart more than in the season of their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Here's where he says the righteous anger is justified, and God will justify you either now or in the future. And he's saying, but you know what? When I dwell on you and I think on you and I meditate on you and I wait on you and I give this over to you, you seem to always make me glad, and you seem to always benefit me. That in the midst of these things, you kind of, he says it's like, he's likening it to the end of harvest, right? So harvest, you've planted, you've labored all these things, the plants have been watered and you've weeded and you've tilled the ground and you've removed the rocks and you've done everything you can, and then the harvest comes and it's such work, right? And you got to bring in the crop and the fruit, and you can't let the animals get it, and you've got to store it away and bundle it or process it. And he goes, but when it's all done, that's when you sit back and you go, man, we're done and everything's in the storehouse and we can have a festivity, a fiesta, a party, man. And everybody's happy, right? Woo, the work is done and we have the fruit of our labor. That's what he's saying. God is like that. Even exceeding that, God gives me this hope, this joy. And in the midst of this, God works to bless, and righteous anger that is listened to by God and answered. And there's a place for righteous anger, right? That God answers it in such a way that bring the blessing. But you got to have the labor. You have to have the planting. You got to have the struggles. You got to go through all these other things. It's not like God's going to protect us from all unrighteousness that's going to come on. In the world, you're going to have tribulation, but Jesus has overcome it. He didn't say, I've overcome all tribulation, therefore you're not going to see any. He's saying, in the world you have tribulation. You will face tribulation, but I will overcome it. And this is the same kind of concept that we see the psalmist David bring out, and that we can trust in the Lord and choose these things because you know what? God is good. And in the end, he's a just and righteous and loving God. Trust in him. Listen to him. Meditate on him. Pray to him. And then allow the Lord of all the earth to work. So, thanks for watching. Love you guys. God bless.